Hey, I have a quick question for you. Are you sick and tired of going through endless resumes, interviewing the wrong candidates, and feeling like you're never really getting anywhere with hiring? If that's hitting a nerve, then you need to go check out Express Employment Professionals. They handle all the heavy lifting. Whether you're searching for temp, part-time, or full-time hires, they've got the network and expertise to make it happen fast. Seriously, if you're ready to transform your workplace with better hiring, Express is the way to go. Head over to expresspros.com or find your local Express Employment Professionals office and give them a call. That's expresspros.com. Start building the dream team you deserve today. Hey everyone, welcome back to Transform Your Workplace. This show is all about helping leaders and teams build workplaces where people can do great work, grow, and actually enjoy the process. We talk real-world leadership, culture, communication, and the small shifts that create big change over time. Before we get started with the conversation, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Xenium HR. Xenium helps growing businesses with HR and payroll support, and they also offer learning and development programs to help managers and teams build stronger habits around leadership, performance, and collaboration. Their high-level goal is to help your people get better so your business gets better. Learn more at xeniumhr.com. All right, now on to today's episode. It's a fun one. I'm sitting down with Lai-DuMone to talk about her book, What If Pigs Can Fly, which is basically a practical guide to following curiosity and turning impossible ideas into actual progress. In this conversation, we get into why curiosity tends to disappear as we get busy and how to bring it back, simple practices like wondering and wandering that spark better thinking, how leaders can create space for better questions, not just faster answers, a super practical way to capture ideas without turning it into some big journaling project, and how teams can use divergent and convergent thinking so their best ideas actually make it to the table. If you lead people, manage change, or feel like your team is stuck in the same loops, this episode will help you open things up and move forward with more creativity and less friction. All right, let's get into my conversation with Lai-DuMone. It is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the show.
I'm happy to be here, Brandon. We finally made it.
We finally made it. We've had to move this a couple of different times, and I thank you for the flexibility. But
of course, no problem at all.
Finally here, we're going to talk about your book. It's called What If Pigs Can Fly? A Practical Guide to Follow Your Curiosities to Achieve Impractical Possibilities. And interesting title, and there's a story behind this. And so you open up the book with the story about this flying pig dangling from your Toyota rearview mirror, and might be a reminder that the impossible might actually be possible. So how did that small symbol of that flying pig shape your view on curiosity and possibility?
So that flying pig was a polymer clay pig I bought in college back in 1992. And I drove this white Toyota Tercel that had no air conditioning, and I hung it right in my rearview mirror. And since there was no air conditioning, I just had my windows down all the time. So I just see this flying pig in the peripheral of my view. And when I went to write the book, it just came back to me, right? This idea that maybe subconsciously, like seeing that flying pig every day, all day long, flying around made me believe that, right, if this little pig can fly, what are we capable of when we follow our curiosities?
And I think that's the problem nowadays is we aren't as curious as we probably once were as kids. You write that ideas come to us as curiosities. And I really love that framing, because when you think about us as adults, we stop following those little sparks of curiosity that we used to have as kids. So how do we get that back?
So again, it's one of those things where I feel like there's so many things that we are just born, and as a child, we know we're curious, we know we're creative, and we just act on it. And then the world changes us, right? The world changes us, and then we get into adulthood and we forget. And we get so busy too. There's always something to do. So there's a couple of things I talk about in my book to do to really hone back in on your curiosities. And this is the concept of pausing and paying attention and wondering and wandering. Right? When I talk about wondering, just, asking those what if questions. When ideas come to you, pause and pay attention, ask what if, how might I, rather than saying no to ourselves. I think maybe even the harder one is this idea of allowing ourselves to wander. And I mean, like, let our mind wander. Again, as adults, we often think, well, my mind is wandering. I'm not being effective. I'm not being productive. So we stop ourselves and, get to work and start doing something. And I'm very guilty of that. Quite a doer. I grew up in an environment where I felt like I think my worth was in doing, not in being. So it's very hard for me to follow my own suggestions of wondering and wandering. So the idea of like wandering in our heads, allowing ourselves that free space to just think and roam around, and then literally wandering the roads. Like one example I give is just, if you go to work the same direction or the same way every single day, take another way the next day. Just these small practices can get us back into wondering and wandering and back into our curiosities.
When you talked about wondering and wandering, you wrote that our curiosities often arise as questions like the how and the why. And I remember as kids, and my kids growing up,
Oh
why?
yeah.
Why, Dad? Why? How? Like, and so how do
I
we,
think I'm past that stage with my child. Now he knows everything.
right? How do we like capture that into our workplaces now? Because I feel like we're probably not asking why and how enough to spark that curiosity in our teams.
Yes. And I think because we are trained adults to act like we know everything, it has to be a very conscious decision. There's no magic bullet here. It literally has to be a conscious decision to recognize, like, when I think I know, maybe I don't. And when I think I know, especially as a leader, maybe instead of telling, maybe I ask. Like, why do you think that is? How else might we? What else do you think we can do? So rather than having all the answers, asking those questions.
You did some storytelling in the book about your mother, the story about your mom and another Vietnamese refugee women who went on to build basically an $8.3 billion industry. And you said that their secret was a simple framework of curiosity, powerful questions, and small steps. What about that story stands out to you most about the embodiment of curiosity?
The story happened at a refugee camp when we first got here to the United States in 1975. And my mom and these 19 women met a Hollywood movie star named Tippi Hedren, who was at the camp volunteering to help them find a career in their new country. And Tippi had already started a typing and sewing class that 20 women signed up for, including my mom. And although she had already set up that whole program, as they were typing, as they were sewing, these women, my mom included, saw her nails and they were curious about Tippi's long red manicure nails. And this says a lot about Tippi because think about, like, she's Tippi Hedren, Hollywood movie star. She's already set up this entire program for them and they're curious about her nails. And instead of ignoring that curiosity, she paused, she paid attention, and she asked, well, what if we could have them licensed manicurists? So for me, the one part of that story is, as leaders, right? We, again, as a leader of that group, she had already started this program. She thought she had it figured out, but she still was able to pause and pay attention to their curiosities. So it really speaks to this idea that all ideas matter and good ideas can come from anyone in your organization. And then when you ask me that, the other thing that really comes up to me is this concept of, and this is more on a personal side, that when I think about my mom's story, I think that they followed their curiosity, asked what if, took those small steps out of necessity, and look what they were able to create, and very unintentionally. It was all out of necessity. So then I think, what about us? Like, I'm in a much better place than my mom was in that refugee camp. So what if I intentionally follow my curiosity? Not because I have to, not because of necessity, but because I had the honor to be able to do so. And I feel like many people who are listening to this, they also are not probably living in a refugee camp, right? And we now have the ability to intentionally follow our curiosities, not just because of circumstances where we have to.
I love the way you're putting that, because out of necessity, like your mother and all these other refugees are coming into another country where they literally have to be curious. They have to ask the right questions and learn a whole new culture. And I imagine this isn't the same at all, but people coming into a new work environment or a new team, get curious, ask the questions. Like, Do you see that? Do you encourage that with teams and leaders, especially to ask questions when they're in a new environment, new team, new dynamic?
Yeah, I think that's the most powerful thing. I'm actually releasing an article in my LinkedIn newsletter on Friday about, maybe the most powerful leaders are the ones that ask the best questions, right? And when I say the best questions, it isn't like these well thought out, philosophical questions. It literally is questions like, well, what would you do? What else could we do? What are some other ideas? Yeah, so definitely the encouraging curiosity in the workplace, I think, is very important. It's always been important. I think is really important in this time because of this idea that people want, like, I think we've learned more and more that people want to know that their voice is heard and their ideas matter. And honestly, not only is that good for the individual to build trust among teams, but you're really allowing all the best ideas to make it to the table. And I really firmly believe in that concept of the best ideas can come from anyone in your organization. Doesn't matter your role or title, everyone can come up with a good idea.
You describe selective attention, Bader-Meinhof effect, as a tool for curiosity. Once we start looking for wonder, we see it everywhere. What shifts when people start to tune their brain that way into selective attention?
So I think about selective attention and it's interesting because the word selective almost means like you're targeting something, but when you are selecting possibility and you're selecting wonder, it's not so much of a narrowing as it opening up. So I really find that when you are, when you start thinking just in terms of, let me put this in a workplace situation. Oftentimes in the workplace, that something happens is a challenge, and we focus on the challenge. Like, what are we going to do about this challenge? Even the way I just asked that feels heavy. So rather than asking what are we going to do about this challenge, right? It's like, well, how might I? How might we? Like, what might this look like in 10 years? What might it look like once we solve it, right? So when you can see it in that positive, then what you're doing is you're literally allowing your brain to think in possibility versus in trying to narrow down on that challenge.
You talk about a curiosity journal, and I think it's such a practical concept, and I might go ahead and do it myself. But you encourage people to write down this wild and crazy ideas without any judgment of themselves. What happens psychologically when we stop filtering ourselves from those wild and crazy ideas that we should be jotting down?
Well, I think a couple of things. Number one, more ideas come to you. Very similar concept that we just talked about. And I think the most important thing about that, whether you're doing it for yourself or within a team, is you're building that trust and psychological safety. Because oftentimes when we come up with these wild and crazy ideas, so a wild and crazy idea for me 3 years ago was, why don't you write a book, Fun? Right? That was a wild and crazy idea. And the first thing that always came to mind was, well, I don't know how to write a book. Right. So then I wouldn't write a book. So this idea that when you allow all those ideas to at least make it to the table rather than saying no to yourself, you're building trust for yourself. And just to give an example in the workplace, and I teach this process in the workplace for divergent and convergent thinking. Because again, oftentimes challenges come up in the workplace. We get in a meeting and we ask, okay, here's the challenge. Who has an idea to solve this problem? Someone will raise their hand, give an idea, and then that idea is vetted right away, right? That won't work because yes, but no, and whatever it is, that vetting is actually a way you're saying no, right? It's actually a way you're saying that idea is okay, but. So in divergent thinking, there's no vetting of ideas. So if you ask the challenge question and someone gives a response to it, you let it sit on the table. There's no back and forth. And then more ideas are coming to the table. And they all sit on the table. And only when all the ideas have made it to the table, do you then say, all right, so here are all the amazing ideas. Now let's move to convergent thinking, which is now the narrowing down of ideas through a set of parameters until you have one idea to move forward with. So when you think about it that way in the workplace, what you're doing is, again, allowing all ideas to the table. So the best idea makes it to the finish line. And now you're building trust. Those people who generally wouldn't say anything because they're afraid their ideas are going to be judged, when they start seeing that, oh, wait, I can say something and there's not going to be any back and forth about it, the next time you have this conversation, they're more likely to give you another idea. And then for yourself too, like in the terms of the book, when we talk about following your own curiosities, it's a similar concept, except you're just talking to yourself instead of other people.
Do you have like, going back to the curiosity journal, like in talking to yourself, do you have like a particular process that you follow? I have a hard time like just setting aside time to journal regularly. And I know that it'd probably spark a lot more curiosity, but is there like a cadence or a methodology in which you could recommend people?
So, okay, so when I say journal, I use that term very lightly because I am not one to sit down even for 3 minutes to do anything. So, so when I say journal, I literally think like, oh, this idea just popped in my head. I have my notes in my phone, just
Yeah.
throw it in there.
I love that.
That's
That's
it.
great. Okay.
Yeah.
That reduces a lot of friction. So I imagine it's probably
Yes.
a lot easier to do it then.
Yeah, it's not leather bound
Okay,
anything.
good, good. Because that is too much pressure for me.
That's right.
Going back to the example you gave about 3 years ago, like you didn't know how to write a book. I like how you frame this up in the book. You talk about your brain as a search engine. You just ask the right questions. And that hit me because using that example, if you were like, I don't know how to write a book, how do I go about writing a book? And you probably went down a rabbit hole of figuring out how to write a book and developed a whole framework for how to do it. Maybe walk me through that process.
I like to let people know like the business I started took me 6 years to start, right? The book took me 4 years to write. And not in terms of like writing, it literally in terms of like, here's the idea. It keeps tapping me on the shoulder. The business kept tapping on my shoulder. The book kept tapping on the shoulder. I kept doing nothing about it because with, the idea of I'm going to write a book would come up. And the first thing my brain would tell me is like, who are you to do that? Who would read it? What are you going to write about? So it's your brain protecting you and saying no to you. So for me, this reframing tool I talk about in the book really helped me. And it helps me with a ton of limiting beliefs now. So when I can catch my brain saying no to an idea, I use this reframing tool. So for the book, it was, first column, what's my thought? I don't know how to write a book. What am I going to do with that? I'm going to do absolutely nothing with that, right? Like it's going to basically, okay, I don't know how to write a book. Like, where do I have to go with that? I have nowhere to go with that. So when I can reframe that thought to something more empowering, my reframe was like, yeah, you're right. I don't know how to write a book, but I can find the resources too. And that was empowering. And then the third column of this exercise is coming up with actual evidence that you can do this, right? So for my evidence was, well, there's a lot of things I learned to do and that I didn't know I could do, like walking as a baby or surfing as a 20-year-old, whatever it is, give yourself some evidence that, all these things that I think I couldn't do, I was able to do. So that reframing exercise really, again, the idea that your brain is a search engine, going from telling my search engine, I don't know how to write a book, right? It's like, okay, an empty page then. Then I ask my search engine, well, I don't know how to write a book, but I can find the resources. Now my search engine can come with a bunch of ideas. And I don't mean like a computer search engine. Literally, like I started thinking like, oh, well, yeah, I could. Like, I know this person. Oh, yeah, I remember that person who wrote a book and we spoke on the same stage together. Let me reach out to that person.
Yeah, I love the chapter you had about mindset because the reframing of like, and this is something that a lot of people say a lot is like, I can't. And you frame it as, I haven't yet, because the can't is limiting. It like stops you in your tracks and there's no progress. Versus I haven't yet means someday I could potentially get there, and asking the right questions will probably allow you to make progress. How do you coach people into thinking this way?
So it's just through sometimes it feels like pulling teeth. Now very hard for me to hear people talk like that. Right. It's really hard for me to hear people say I can't, or, oh, well, like, but in 30 years, this might happen. So I'm not going to do that now. So it's really hard for me to hear people talk like that. And I always, clearly refer people to my book and this concept. When you say coaching, I don't really do one-on-one coaching, but one of the tools I use in my workshops for the book, the work I do in leadership development, is this concept of one small step. So when I hear that, I try to get people to think in smaller terms than these big goals, because that's what helped me. The way I first started my business was by taking one small step, and I learned that. Let me go back and kind of like try and refresh my own memory on how this happened. Again, the idea for this business had literally been sitting in my brain for 6 years, every now and then tapping me on the shoulder and me always saying, who am I to? There's no way, all that stuff. And it wasn't until I read a book called One Small Step Can Change Your Life, the Kaizen Way by Dr. Robert Maurer, that I realized like, oh, like, because all that procrastinating, all that saying no to myself, it also made me very not confident, right? Like very unconfident about being able to do any of this. And it made me feel like, why am I like this? Why don't I just take action? But when I read his book, I realized like, oh, we're all like this, right? It's our brain trying to protect us from harm. So it's not me, it's my brain. So once I knew that, and sort of like the neuroscience behind this idea that our brain is here to protect us, and when we try to do something or reach a goal that's way off, and our brain feels like it's dangerous, is going to shift into protection mode and tell us, no, you're not going to do that. But when we are able to break down that big goal into the tiniest steps, then you can reach your goal faster by taking those small steps.
I resonated with this section a lot when you mentioned the Kaizen way, because a big goal, like even for me, I've talked about writing a book forever. I just don't know what the book would be about, and I don't even know where to start. So I like the way you're framing it up, like one small step. Maybe it's as simple as a working title or an outline. How did you start? Like when you decided to write a book, like what was that tiny small step that you made?
Okay, so I just reveal more information about myself. So for years, I had in my calendar every week 2-hour blocks to write this book. For at least 2 years, every week 2-hour blocks. That happened 0 times, like absolutely 0 times in the span of 2 years that I sit down to write. Because even looking at my calendar and saying a 2-hour block to write, that was overwhelming. So what I did was I'm like, okay, I'm going to make that 15 minutes every week, right? 15 minutes. So then I started writing for 15 minutes. And when I wrote for 17 minutes, I felt successful and I built confidence. Whereas let's say I had that 2-hour block and I could only write for 1 hour, then I felt like a failure. And okay, so then the idea of like the things opening up, I have several stories about that. This one was I started writing for my 15 minutes finally. And then I went and spoke at this event. And this gentleman, his name is Eric Severson, he was speaking there as well. And he's like, you should write a book. And I said, I'm actually writing a book. He said, well, I edit and publish books.
Wow.
Right? Like, and that's who edited and published my book.
That is wild. You put that energy out in the world and then look at
Yes.
this like right in front of your
Yeah,
face.
absolutely.
Amazing. What you're saying reminds me years ago, I'd run a book club inside my organization for a long time. And one of the books we decided to read was The Artist's Way at Work. And in that, I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but one of the core pieces to that was an activity called Morning Pages, where you would, I can't remember how long it was. It was like 2 minutes of just nonstop writing. Do not stop writing until the 2 minutes is up. And then in the end, like you do that 2 minutes a day, like you're going to have like all your ideas on the table, maybe questions that you can research later. Just a lot of really uniqueness came from it. And that was such a small thing. It's 2 minutes. You can write for 2 minutes. It's so
2 minutes.
easy.
And I love that concept of it not having to be perfect. I think that I got caught up in that too. It's like, well, I'm writing, but it doesn't make sense. So now I'm going to drop it because it just looks messy. Let it look messy. It's supposed to look messy. It's divergent thinking in writing form. Just let all your ideas out there and then you can put it together later.
Going back to that, like I found myself wanting to go back and edit all the time. Like why? But why? It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to just spill out of me and get it on paper. You said something really bold in the book, and I love the line. You said, when you move in the direction of your curiosities and dreams, the universe has you back. What do you mean by that?
I mean, and I say that from experience, where when you take actions, you have your curiosity, and that's one thing, right? To have that curiosity, but when you actually commit to action, even the smallest action, I definitely believe in this idea of energy, right? So you're putting out energy that I'm committed to this. Now help me. And the universe will answer you. And it's done that for me in many ways, including with the book. And like that's the only explanation I can give, right? It's not like I can say anything more about it other than like just try it. And I do it all the time now. I just put out the energy, and in just mysterious ways things come back to me.
I love that. So the book is so great because it's like 100 pages, and then there's like a workbook in the back. So I really want people to go get it because there's a lot of exercises that we're talking about today that people can work on in a very simple way. But in the end of the book, you write that allow your love for curiosities to grow larger than your fear of them. And if listeners remember one thing from the book, would you want it to be that line right there?
Yes, and yeah, that and with this idea of, curiosity is truly the most powerful thing we own. And I believe that our curiosity are very unique to each of us. So follow yours, right? Just take the smallest actions and just see where it leads you. And honestly, like, and not to say that every curiosity you have is going to lead you somewhere. It might not lead you. I mean, lots of my curiosity, I go absolutely nowhere. but the idea is just, if something's continue to tap you on the shoulder, just take the smallest step towards it and see what happens.
I love that. I think not only could curiosity be transformational at an individual level, but inside of our organizations, if we were a lot more curious in our teams, imagine the possibilities. I'm sure you see this all the time in just the creative space. Maybe talk about that a little bit, just the transformation that could happen.
Yeah. So again, like, think about just in our conversation already about what we've talked about on an individual level. Think about that on a team level or a corporation level. If we walk in there thinking we already know, or if we're sitting in our challenges, where are we going to go? Right? We're going to stay exactly where we are. But when you start asking those powerful questions like what if, how might we, trying different things, following curiosity, understanding that failure is part of it. And there's another concept I teach called creative chaos, which is this idea is like, okay, so if you are going to bring this into your organization and make curiosity part of your culture, know that you're going to face creative chaos, right? Know that you're going to face a time, every single time you try something new, where it's going to look like it's not working out, right? It's going to look a little messy. And what often happens is people get to that point where it's messy and they make a U-turn and start doing things the way they've always done it. So what my book and I suggest is, not ignore, but get through that creative chaos, because on the other side is where innovation lives. And I'm sorry if you can hear those dogs back there.
No, it's all good.
They're happy about this too.
Hey, it can be messy. Everybody's got dogs and pets, and my dog goes crazy at Amazon trucks all the time. Vaughn, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Your book is called What If Pigs Can Fly? A Practical Guide to Follow Your Curiosities to Achieve Impractical Possibilities. Book's available on, I'm sure, Amazon and all other retailers. What else do you want to plug? Any way that you want people to connect with you?
Yes. So LinkedIn, I am always on LinkedIn. I'm a big proponent of being on there. I've met some of the most amazing people through LinkedIn. And I hope some of these listeners will be some of those amazing people I get to meet in the future.
My guest today has been Vaughn Lai-DuMone. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.